The wreckage and the challenge. The Zirac Dominion warship lay broken on the barren moon, its once powerful form now a crumbling wreck. Fires flickered in the twisted remains of the ship's hull, and thick smoke drifted into the dark sky. The mighty warship had fought bravely but had lost. Now it was nothing more than a dead husk, abandoned by its own people. Inside the wreckage, a group of Zirac engineers stood in silence, scanning the damage. Their leader, Chief Engineer Xalvorin, ran his three-fingered hands over the shattered control panel. The ship's power core was dead, its engines were destroyed, and its weapon systems were completely offline. "This ship is finished," one of the engineers muttered. The Xalvorin nodded. "We spent centuries perfecting our technology, and now it lies in ruin. Even if we had a full team of our best scientists, it would take us decades to repair this ship." The other engineers lowered their heads in agreement. There was no way to fix this. The Zirac Dominion was known for its advanced technology, far superior to the crude machines of lesser species. Their warships were built to last thousands of years, yet here it was, broken beyond repair. They had no choice but to send a distress signal and wait. If the enemy found them first, they were doomed. Then footsteps echoed in the wreckage. Someone new had arrived. A human stepped forward. Lieutenant Jax Carter looked around the ruined warship, hands on his hips, eyes scanning every damaged piece of alien machinery. He was young, barely in his 20s, with a lean but strong frame. His dark brown hair was messy, and his uniform was torn from the crash landing of his own ship. But his sharp eyes showed no fear, only curiosity. The Zirac engineers turned toward him, their expressions unreadable. Jax smirked. "You guys look like you need a mechanic." Xalvorin narrowed his eyes. "Human, this ship is beyond repair. You cannot fix what our greatest minds have failed to restore." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? Let me take a look." The Zirac engineers exchanged glances. A human fixing a Zirac warship. It was laughable. "This is a waste of time," one of them muttered. Xalvorin crossed his arms. "Very well, human, but you will not succeed." Jax crouched near the main power console, wiping away dust and broken wires. His fingers traced over the intricate alien circuits, his mind working fast. He grinned. "Well, there's your problem." The Zirac engineers frowned. "What?" Jax pointed to a burnt-out relay module deep in the system. "Your power grid is too centralized. One core failure, and the whole thing shuts down. Bad design. You guys rely too much on perfect conditions." Xalvorin stiffened. "Our technology is the finest in the galaxy." Jax chuckled. "Yeah. Then why is your ship dead while I'm still standing?" The Zirac engineers didn't answer. Jax pulled a multi-tool from his belt and got to work. He began rewiring circuits, bypassing the damaged sections with makeshift connections. He worked fast, his hands moving with precision. The Zirac engineers watched in disbelief. Jax wasn't studying their tech. He understood it. More than that, he was improving it. After a few minutes, Jax tapped the control panel. A flicker of energy pulsed through the ship. The emergency lights flashed on. The Zirac engineers gasped. "That should not be possible," one of them whispered. Jax grinned. "And that's just the start." Xalvorin stepped forward, eyes filled with shock and suspicion. How did you do that?" Jax shrugged. "Your systems are advanced, sure, but you overcomplicate things. Humans, we make things work, even when they're broken." The Zirac engineers exchanged nervous glances. This human had done in minutes what they believed was impossible. Jax rolled up his sleeves. "Give me 30 minutes. I'll have this ship running." The Xalvorin stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well, human. Show us what you can do." Jax smirked. "Time to work some magic." Jax Carter wiped the sweat from his forehead, his hands moving fast across the alien control panel. He had 30 minutes. That's what he had promised. 30 minutes to do what the Zurich engineers thought was impossible. Zalvorin and his team stood around him, their expressions shifting between disbelief and suspicion. No one, not even their greatest scientists, had been able to restore this ship. Yet, this human wasn't hesitating. Jax grabbed a damaged power relay, twisting it loose from its slot. The Zurich systems were complex, but he had seen patterns like this before. Different species, different ships, but at the core, energy was energy. Circuits were circuits. "Hand me that tool," Jax said, pointing at a strange-looking device on the floor. One of the Zurich engineers hesitated before picking it up. He didn't like taking orders from a primitive species, but the human had already done the impossible. He had brought power back. Zalvorin crossed his arms. "You claim you can fix this ship, but do you even understand its quantum drive systems?" Jax chuckled, not looking up. "I don't need to understand every fancy term you guys use. I just need to make it work." He yanked out a burnt circuit board, tossed it aside, and began rerouting energy through backup systems. A deep hum filled the air. The Zurich engineers gasped as the ship's central power core flashed to life. The emergency lights that had flickered moments ago now burned with steady energy. This is not possible," one of the engineers whispered. Jax grinned, "And yet here we are." Suddenly, a warning alarm blared across the wreckage. Jax frowned. "What's that?" Zalvorin's face darkened. "A proximity alert." One of the Zurich engineers rushed to a damaged console, his hand shaking as he read the display. His expression turned pale. "It's a Gorthan hunter squad." The room fell silent. Jax had heard that name before. The Gorthan Empire, a brutal, merciless race that hunted survivors of battles. If they found this wreck, they wouldn't just kill the Zurich survivors. They'd enslave them or worse. Jax exhaled sharply. "How long do we have?" Zalvorin's voice was grim. "Less than 20 minutes." Jax's fingers tightened on his tools. He didn't have time to fix everything. The ship wasn't battle-ready, and the weapons were still offline. But he had an idea. Jax turned back to the control panel, his mind racing. "All right, change of plans. We're not fighting. We're getting out of here." Zalvorin frowned. "What do you mean?" Jax pointed to the engine systems. "I can't fix your ship's weapons in time, but I can get your thrusters working. If I can reroute power, we can at least escape before they arrive." Zalvorin hesitated, but Jax cut him off. "Unless you want to stay and find out what the Gorthans do to survivors, I suggest you let me work." For the first time, the Zurich engineers said nothing. Zalvorin gave a slow nod. "Do it." Jax cracked his knuckles. "Now we're talking." He raced against the clock, his hands moving faster than ever. Sparks flew as he connected broken circuits, rerouted power, and forced the ship's dying systems to work just long enough. The engine rumbled, shaking the entire ship. Jax checked the display. 10 minutes until the Gorthans arrived. "Come on, baby," he muttered. "Work with me." The thrusters flickered, then roared to life. The Zurich engineers stared in shock. Zalvorin's eyes widened. He did it." Jax grinned. "Told you. Now let's get the hell out of here." But just as the ship lifted off the ground, the proximity alarm blared again. The Gorthans had arrived. The Zurich warship shuddered violently as it lifted off the rocky surface. Jax Carter kept his hand steady on the failing control systems, his heart pounding in his chest. Thrusters are online, but they're barely holding. Jax called out, "We've got to move. Now." Zalvorin gripped the armrest of his seat, his sharp eyes fixed on the incoming threat. Outside, 3 Gorthan hunter ships descended from the dark sky, their angular black hulls reflecting the distant starlight. "They found us," one of the Zurich engineers whispered, his voice filled with dread. The Gorthans weren't here for a fight. They were here to end things quickly. Their ships had weapons fully powered, ready to erase them from existence. Jax clenched his jaw. Not on my watch. He slammed his hand onto the controls, forcing more power into the failing engines. The ship lurched forward, its thrusters sputtering, but it was moving. That was all that mattered. A deep, robotic voice echoed over the ship's damaged comm system. Unidentified vessel. Power down immediately or be destroyed. Zalvorin hissed. They're giving us a chance to surrender. Jax snorted. Yeah. And what happens after that? One of the Zirek engineers swallowed hard. Slavery, or worse. Jax didn't hesitate. Then we don't surrender. He pulled hard on the ship's failing navigation controls, sending the battered warship into a sharp, unpredictable turn. The Zirek crew yelped as gravity shifted, but Jax didn't care. A bolt of plasma roared past the ship, missing them by inches. The Gorthons had just opened fire. Zalvorin's eyes widened. We won't survive a direct hit. Our shields are dead. Yeah, I know. Jax's mind raced. The ship wasn't battle-ready, and its engines were held together by hope and desperation. But he still had one trick left. Jax's fingers flew across the control panel, bypassing the ship's safety protocols. What are you doing? Zalvorin barked. Jax grinned. Something crazy. With one final override command, Jax rerouted all remaining power to the engines. The ship jerked forward with violent speed, the force slamming everyone against their seats. The Zirek engineers cried out in panic. We'll rip apart at this speed. Jax's knuckles turned white on the controls. Not if I time it right. The Gorthon ships adjusted, firing another barrage of deadly plasma. Jax saw it coming, calculated the angles, and at the very last second, he spun the ship, a near-suicidal maneuver. The Zirek warship tilted hard, its broken systems screaming in protest. But Jax's gamble paid off. The Gorthon blasts missed by a fraction of a second, searing past them into empty space. Yes, Jax shouted, punching the air. Zalvorin stared at him, stunned. You actually. ALERT. Power levels critical. Jax's victory froze in his throat. The ship's warning systems blared. The engines, already pushed beyond their limits, began to fail. And then, the worst sound of all. The Gorthons were adjusting their aim. We won't survive another shot, a Zirek engineer muttered. Zalvorin turned to Jax. Tell me you have another trick, human. Jax exhaled. Yeah, but you're not gonna like it. The Zirek commander's expression hardened. Do it. Jax cracked his knuckles. All right, hold on. This is gonna be rough. As the Gorthons prepared to fire the killing blow, Jax did something insane. He shut off the engines completely. The Zirek warship dropped like a rock, plummeting toward the planet's surface. The Gorthons fired, and missed. The Zirek crew screamed as the ship tumbled, shaking violently. Jax watched the control panel, waiting for the right moment. 10 seconds to impact. 9, 8, 7. He reactivated the thrusters at the last possible second. The ship pulled up just in time, barely skimming the rocky terrain. Dust and debris exploded into the air as they leveled out, vanishing beneath the Gorthon's line of fire. The Zirek crew panted in disbelief. The Zalvorin turned to Jax. You're insane. Jax grinned. Yeah. And? Zalvorin smirked. And I think you just saved our lives. But before they could celebrate, a new warning flashed across the screen. Incoming transmission from the Gorthons. Jax's smile faded. Oh great. What now? Zalvorin answered the transmission. A massive Gorthon commander appeared on the screen, his face twisted with amusement. So, the human is clever. I like that. But your luck won't last forever. Then, the Gorthon grinned. We're not here for your ship, little Deathworlder. We're here for you. Jax stared at the screen, his pulse pounding in his ears. The massive Gorthon commander, his reptilian face scarred from countless battles, grinned with razor-sharp teeth. "We're not here for your ship, little Deathworlder. We're here for you." The Zurek crew froze. The air inside the ship felt heavy, like an invisible weight pressing down on them. Zalvorin was the first to speak. Why would the Gorthons care about a single human? His voice was calm, but Jax could hear the unease beneath it. The Gorthon commander let out a low chuckle. "You don't understand, do you? This human just pulled off a miracle. He repaired a warship in minutes, outmaneuvered my fleet in a rusted wreck, and escaped certain death, all without breaking a sweat." Jax crossed his arms. "Yeah, so what?" The commander's eyes gleamed. "So, human, I want to make you an offer." Jax raised an eyebrow. "An offer?" The Gorthon leaned forward. "Join us." The Zyrek crew gasped. Even Exalvorin looked stunned. Jax blinked. "Come again." The commander smirked. "Humans are rare in the galaxy. Most species fear you. They say you're unpredictable, too violent, too dangerous." He chuckled. "But I see something else. I see potential. With your skills, you could be unstoppable under our banner." Zalvorin stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You expect him to betray us? To join a fleet that enslaves and conquers?" The commander shrugged. "Survival is all that matters. Wouldn't you agree, human?" Jax was silent for a moment. Then he laughed. A short chuckle at first, then a full, genuine laugh. The Zerek crew looked confused. The Gorthon commander's smirk vanished. "Something funny." Jax wiped his eyes. "Oh man, that was a good one. You seriously think I'd sign up with you? After you just tried to vaporize me?" The Gorthon's eyes narrowed. "I'm offering you power, human." Jax leaned forward, grinning. "And I'm offering you a hard pass." Silence. Then the Gorthon's grin returned, wider, more sinister. "That's a shame," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "I really wanted to recruit you." His tone shifted, colder now, more dangerous. "But if you won't join us..." The ship's sensors blared to life. Zalvorin's eyes widened. "They're charging weapons." The Gorthon commander's smile never faded. "Then I guess we'll have to take you apart and see what makes you so special." The comms cut off, and the Zirek ship shuddered as the first plasma blasts rained down. "Shields are still offline," a Zirek engineer yelled. "We won't last long." Jax gritted his teeth. "Then we don't fight fair." He slammed his hands on the console, pulling up the ship's system diagnostics. "There's gotta be something. Anything. We can use." Zalvorin glanced over. "What are you looking for?" Jax's eyes lit up as he spotted something. A system buried deep in the ship's old databanks. A self-destruct protocol. But not just any self-destruct. This one was built into the Zirak war doctrine. A last resort failsafe that could trigger a hyperwave overload, sending a shockwave powerful enough to disable any nearby ships. Jax's fingers hovered over the controls. "If I time this right." Zalvorin's eyes narrowed. "That's a death sentence." Jax smirked. "Not if we're already gone." The Zalvorin stared at him for a second, then nodded. "What do you need?" Jax's hands flew over the controls. "Divert all power to the jump drive. Even if it's at 5%, we just need one shot." A Zirek engineer's voice shook. "We won't get far with that." Jax's grin sharpened. "We don't need far. We just need anywhere but here." The ship rattled as another blast slammed into their hull. The Gorthons were closing in. The countdown for the hyperwave overload ticked down -30 seconds. The jump drive flickered to life, barely holding together. Jax took a deep breath. "Everybody hold on." He punched the command. The hyperwave detonated. A pulse of blinding white energy surged outward. The Gorthon ships lurched, their systems failing instantly. Lights flickered, engines stalled, and their weapons went dead. And in that same moment, the Zirak warship vanished into hyperspace. The Gorthon fleet was left drifting, helpless. The commander growled, watching the empty space where Jax had just been. Then his smile returned. This isn't over, human. Not by a long shot. The ship's engine sputtered, struggling to fire up as the mechanical horrors closed in. Jax turned just in time to see one of the rusted machines lunge at the ramp. Its jagged metal fingers scraped against the hull, its red eyes glowing like dying embers. "Get this thing moving," Jax yelled, firing his plasma cutter at the creature. The shot melted part of its chest, but it kept coming, clawing its way forward. Exalvorin grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby crate and swung it with all his strength. The blow knocked the machine back, sending it tumbling down the ramp. But more of them were climbing the wreckage, their limbs twitching as they adapted to the chase. Velik cursed from the cockpit. "Engines at 20%. It's gonna take a minute." "We don't have a minute." Jax shot back, grabbing a loose cable and jamming it into the exposed power core. Sparks exploded around him, but the engine hum deepened. 35%, Velik shouted. Outside, the mechanical creatures started to change. Their bodies twisted, shifting into newer, deadlier forms. Some sprouted blade-like arms, while others extended their legs into jagged spikes. One even let out a hollow synthetic roar, an eerie echo of something long dead trying to live again. "They're adapting," Exalvorin growled, kicking another machine off the ramp. Jax's fingers flew across the console. "We need a distraction." His eyes landed on a flickering panel near the cargo bay, one of the old warheads they had salvaged from the wreckage. It wasn't functional as a missile anymore, but as an explosive. Jax grinned. "I have an idea. Keep them off me for 30 seconds. Alvorin groaned. "I hate when you say that." Jax sprinted to the warhead, pried open the casing, and rewired the detonation circuit. He set a 10-second countdown. Then he grabbed the heavy missile casing and shoved it toward the ramp. "Everybody inside," Jax roared. The team scrambled back as Jax kicked the warhead down into the swarm of machines. The creatures barely had time to react before. Boom! The explosion rocked the ship, sending a fiery shockwave through the wreckage. The machines were torn apart, fragments of metal and synthetic flesh scattering into the void. Velik seized the moment. "Engines at 50%. I can punch it now." "Do it," Jax shouted. The ship lurched forward, breaking free from the scrapyard. Flames and debris spiraled behind them. The mechanical creatures lost in the chaos. As they cleared the battlefield, Jax collapsed into a seat, breathing heavily. "That," he panted, "was way too close." Zalvorin gave him a look. "Next time, let's not wake up an ancient army of death machines, yeah?" Jax chuckled. "No promises." Velik sighed in relief as the engine stabilized. "We got what we needed. Let's get this ship fixed and get out of here before anything else wakes up." Jax leaned back, staring at the void outside. The wreckage drifted, silent once more. But deep in the shadows, among the broken remains of the machines, something stirred. A single red eye flickered back to life. The silence in the cockpit was deafening. Jax's fingers drummed nervously on the console as the ship sped away from the wreckage field. They had escaped the immediate danger, but something felt off. Something was watching them. "I'm not liking this," Jax muttered, glancing over his shoulder toward the rearview monitor. The void behind them stretched endlessly, but his gut told him they weren't alone. Exalvorin was still reviewing the ship's diagnostics, his face a mask of concentration. "The power core is stable, but we need to fix the hull breaches before we can jump again." Velik, sitting in the co-pilot's seat, turned around. "No offense, but I don't think we should stop anywhere just yet." "Agreed," Jax said, his eyes scanning the stars. "I don't trust that battlefield. We barely survived, and there's something still out there." Zalvorin grunted. "We can't go anywhere without the repairs. We're dead in the water if we don't fix the hull." Jax's instincts screamed at him to keep moving, but he knew Exalvorin was right. They had no choice but to make repairs before they could think of leaving the sector. The question was, how could they do it safely? "We'll have to take turns," Jax said after a long pause. "Velik, you and Zalvorin can stay on the ship. I'll go back to the wreckage, see if there's anything else useful. Stay alert. If we see anything suspicious, we leave. Fast." Zalvorin nodded. "Fine, but hurry up. I don't like the feeling of this place." With a grim look, Jax opened the airlock and suited up. As he floated into the dark abyss, he couldn't shake the feeling that the wreckage wasn't the only thing haunting this sector. The remnants of warships drifted lazily around him, their once proud forms reduced to skeletal husks. But there, among the debris, Jax saw something new, a faint glimmer of light coming from a structure that had been buried beneath the wreckage. He moved toward it cautiously, his mag boots clanking with each step. The glimmer was coming from an old repair bay, one of the few places in the battlefield that still showed signs of activity. Jax's heart raced. Could it be? He approached the structure, carefully pulling away rusted panels and debris. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. It wasn't a repair bay at all. It was a crypt. Inside the chamber, glass pods lined the walls, each containing what appeared to be preserved bodies. Not just any bodies. The features were unmistakable, humanoid but far too advanced, too well preserved. They wore armor that shimmered with a technology beyond anything Jax had ever seen. They weren't just war machines, Jax whispered to himself. They were warriors. The machines they had fought earlier, they weren't just leftovers of a forgotten war. They were the last remnants of an ancient race of soldiers. And these soldiers, these warlords, had been kept in stasis, waiting. Jax backed away slowly, a sick feeling in his stomach. If these were their enemies, if this was what the Gorthans and others were afraid of, they were in far more danger than they realized. Suddenly, a loud click echoed in the chamber. Jax froze, every muscle tensed. The pod closest to him hummed with energy, and the glass began to crack. His blood ran cold as he watched the figure inside stir, its eyes flickering open, glowing red. The warrior inside was waking up. Jax knew, without a doubt, that this was no accident. The war gods were stirring, and they were about to be unleashed once more. Zalvorin, Jax hissed into the comms. "We need to leave. Now." He didn't wait for a response. The figure inside the pod let out a low growl as it began to move, its metallic armor creaking as it rose to its feet. "Jax," the voice from his comms crackled. "What's going on?" Jax's voice was tight, filled with urgency. "I found something, and we're not alone anymore." The warlord took a step forward, his armor clanking as he moved. Jax's heart raced. Time was running out. Jax didn't waste a second. He sprinted toward the airlock, hearing the slow, methodical steps of the warrior behind him. His pulse thundered in his ears, the weight of his suit feeling like a lead anchor, but he couldn't slow down. The warrior's heavy footsteps were getting closer, a constant reminder that he wasn't going to outrun it if he didn't move fast enough. Come on," Jax muttered, his voice tight, as he reached the airlock control panel. His gloved hand fumbled with the buttons, sweat dripping from his forehead. The warrior's growl echoed through the chamber. It was like a predator closing in on its prey. "Jax, are you all right?" Zalvorin's voice crackled through the comms, but Jax couldn't respond. The airlock doors weren't opening fast enough. With a final, desperate shove, the doors slid open just as the first heavy thud of the warrior's footstep vibrated the floor beneath him. Jax dove into the airlock, slamming the button to close the doors as the warrior's shadow loomed behind him. The doors slid shut just in time, trapping the warrior outside. Jax collapsed against the airlock wall, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. His hand shook as he fumbled to pull himself upright. He had barely escaped. Zalvorin's voice came through again, sharp and worried. "What happened, Jax? What did you find down there?" Jax didn't answer immediately. He was still trying to calm his racing heart, but the gravity of the situation began to sink in. He hadn't just uncovered ancient soldiers, he had awakened them. And now, they were here, out of their crypts, fully functional, and hunting for a fight. "They're not just machines," Jax finally said, his voice low and grave. "They were warriors, living, breathing beings, and one of them just woke up." The silence on the other end of the comms felt like a lead weight pressing down on him. Zalvorin knew exactly what that meant. "That's bad," Velik said from the cockpit, his voice a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Do you think there are more?" Jax didn't hesitate. "I don't think we're the first to disturb them. Whatever was left behind is waking up. We need to get out of here now." Zalvorin was already moving. "The ship's patched up enough. We can leave at full speed, but we'll need a jump to escape their territory. We need to make sure we're not being followed," Jax added. "That warlord might be just the beginning." As the ship's engines roared to life, Jax stood, finally catching his breath. He took a deep breath and glanced out the viewport. The wreckage of the battlefield seemed quiet now, almost peaceful. But Jax knew that beneath the surface, something far more dangerous was waking up. As the ship began its evasive maneuvers, Jax's thoughts were consumed with the warrior he had seen. He had fought machines before, had taken down some of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. But this wasn't just another battle. This was something different, something far more terrifying. "We're not safe yet," Jax muttered to himself. The warrior's eyes were burned into his mind, those glowing red eyes. There was a predatory intelligence behind them. They weren't just relics of an ancient war. They were living nightmares, and Jax had unleashed them. The ship entered hyperspace, but even as the stars blurred into streaks of light, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Something out there was following them, and the fight they had just escaped was nothing compared to the one that was coming. The war gods were awake, and they were hungry.